And almost last but not least, for his friendship and contributions of a good year and supplying publications of great interest. Thanks also to her readers, Sally Kendrew, me again, Linda Watson, Anthony Henson, Marilyn Fryer and David Ormondy for their critique. And Jill especially wants to thank Mr. Sam Beer for his playing of the last post at Dad's funeral. It was the most beautiful I'd ever heard. And I'd just like to say that I'm exceptionally proud of Dad and I'm particularly proud of you.
Well, I'm really sorry, but mine's not really that short. Firstly, I want to thank you all for turning up. Spanner would be, you'd be really proud, you really would. I want to touch briefly on the fact that this week is Remembrance Week. This is the week when we remember all those who fought in all wars and have lost their lives. As most of you will know by now, Dad was in Bomber Command, and he said the saddest time was counting the empty beds on the morning after a raid. Bombing indiscriminately was a political dilemma, but it was the very famous Bomber Harris that pursued this means, and it did become a means to an end. Winston Churchill said, and I'm going to struggle, I need a glass of water. Bear with me. The fighters are our salvation, but the bombers alone provide the means of victory. And now, some 65 years later, Bomber Command has had the go-ahead for an official public memorial in Green Park. How sad that it's taken so long. Now yesterday the British Legion marched to the War Memorial in the recreation ground, as they do every year. Sadly Dad, aka Spanner, is no longer with them, nor indeed is his good friend Mr. Joe Hardcastle. As most of you know, Dad passed away in June in Lister House British Legion Home, and sadly he was shortly followed by Joe. Joe's contributed his war memories to the book, and he recalled that in June 1944 they were anchored off the Normandy beaches, surrounded by wrecked landing craft and abandoned transport and tanks. They progressed into France, eventually going over the Seine into Le Havre. I hope I said that right. The Germans were twice asked to surrender and they twice refused, so the RAF was called in for support. Well, lo and behold, who do you think was in that RAF mission? Spanner. Jokingly, in recent times, he said to Joe, "If I'd known you were on the ground, I'd have dropped a bomb on you." Joe could have responded about the aiming capabilities of Bomber Command, but he remained a gentleman. So can we all raise our glasses, I'm sure you've all got some, to toast Spanner and Mr. Joe Hardcastle, who are no longer with us. Thank you. Spanner and Joe. Thank you. Not so long ago, I came to Paisley to see two young gentlemen who were stalwarts of the British Legion. They gave me information about the Legion and some of their, just wait a minute while I turn the page over, some of their memories, and these are in the book. So without further ado, would you put your hands together for Mr. Brian Weatherhead and Mr. Brian Hicks. Come by. And there's a photograph. No, there isn't, sorry. That's right. That's yours, Brian. Thank you very much. Thank you. Very kind, thank you. And that's yours. Thank you very much.
God bless you.
Thanks for all your help. Thank you. I've lost my spot now. After the war ended, Dad had to think of his next occupation, and he went to work for Dick Andrews. He was a funeral director at Dakin. And after a year, Dad bought the business from Dick, and then he registered as an engineer and became a building contractor. He went on to employ over 50 men over 45 years in this deal. 3 of these men, whom I christened the 3 Musketeers, came to Lister House and told me tales. And what tales they were. of these men, I'm saying that again, sorry. Firstly, please step forward your very own Dalesman and renowned raconteur, Mr. Frank Dean. Thank you, Frank. I'm finished yet. That's for you, Frank. I'm finished yet. That's the photograph I took of you. And now we come to one of Dad's pride and joys, because this man played cricket for Yorkshire no less, Mr. Peter Chadwick. There you go, Peter. And this is for you as well. There you go. That's Three Musketeers. And finally of the three, we come to Frank's apprentice, who started at the tender age of 15 years back in 1953, Mr. Terry Thorne. There are two other men who worked for Dad in later years who were kind enough to invite me to drill them for the stories, and they had me in absolute stitches. They were a double act, particularly in remembering all the things Dad used to do to save money. Morecambe and Wise, move over. So please put your hands together for Mr. Ian Eglin, Eggy, and Mr. Paul Ripley. I've given them their presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, love. You've got yours. Ian's had to leave, but he's avoided doing this. Dad was also a musician, and he managed to master several instruments over the years. He was a member of Lofthouse and Middlesbrough Brass Band for a long, long time. And I went to see a young lady who's been in that band since 1961. She gave me background information about the band and also some rather amusing stories. And I say thank you to Mrs. Gladys Breakson. She's not here today, but thank you. Dad's musical bent took him in another direction, and he got together with some like-minded folk, and they formed themselves a skiffle stroke dance band. They had someone on tea chest, which was a box with a pole and a string at 45 degrees to emulate a bass. It worked. On keyboards was none other than your very own Mr. John Reckon, and he and his Mrs. Barbara showed me some smashing stuff. I give you Mr. and Mrs. John Reckon. Thank you. That's the lovely stories, thank you. No, that's the sorry, she's getting used to it. It's the hired help. I particularly want to thank Major Charles Laidlaw, who was not only an exemplary son-in-law to Dad, but also listened with rapt attention to Dad's tales and invited him to Findingdales, where Charles, along with his English counterpart, was in charge of the Anglo-American upgrade. Charles cannot be with us today as he lives in Alabama, but he says that he's with us in spirit, so thank you, Charles. Excuse me. A lady who was very special and was in my Dad's life at a very young age gave me a beautiful story. She was in Operation Pied Piper, that war effort to get the children away from possible target areas. She was an evacuee who was put on a train in Leeds and ended up in Summerbridge School, waiting for a vehicle to take her to a new home. She was billeted with my grandparents and my dad and his brother at a cottage in Hartford. Her story is moving and heartwarming, and she wrote a poem which she allowed me to include in the book. Her and her husband Jim have been good friends of my dad, and I hope they will remain my friends. By coincidence of the same surname, Mrs. June Watson and her husband Jim. That's June's. And there's a picture. Small one. That's it, paper. I couldn't I was hoping to find a picture of June when she was a little girl, but I couldn't find one, so those are my grandparents.
Yes, thank you very much.
And guess whose 60th birthday we're also celebrating today? My brother, Terence Newby Watson, Spanner's only son. Step forward, brother, and receive your just rewards. There's Ray at the back of you, in there there's something for Terry. It is wrapped up. No. I'm going to eat it. There you are, Terry. Open that first.
With Mickey tape here, I know.
That's your birthday present.
It's in the box of chocolates.
No.
Here we go.
You don't need any more weight. It's an eagle annual from your birth date.
What is it?
51.
Yeah.
You've got to read this.
This is a picture of Terry and his dad bonding. Can you see that?
Give your sister a kiss.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Terry. Happy birthday to you.
What's down on the tape to be 1952?
Hey! Come on, Terry, you've both got so much to say. Come on! Let me show you.
But ultimately, and hugely importantly, I have to thank my PA, not only for her memory input, but also for her enthusiasm and support and being good at running around. And it is she who's run up and down this dale, this high street, lathering it with posters. My sister, Mrs. Mary Kilteray. There's a bunch of yellow roses for you. Oh, bless you. Thank you. I need a drink.
Again.
This is neat, Jim. And lastly, because I'm sure you're all a bit bored by now, lastly I have to thank my husband, my Putsy PA, and I can honestly say that without whom this would not be happening. My husband Warren, who was nursed me, I'm losing my voice, and stood by me and supported me wholeheartedly throughout. And he designed the book cover, and he designed the posters, and he designed the website. Now that is a PA. Thank you, Warren. And thank you.